Well, this morning I'd like to talk to you about heaven. We were reading not long ago, and I was really impressed with the fact that right now, as we go through things that we're experiencing at the moment, as well as what we will in the near future, we're going to need to have our focus about the future when we are given what we call heaven. Now, there are two places that we call heaven. There's the place where God lives right now, up through the Orion hole. It's actually a hole, and some telescopes have seen beautiful light coming through that passageway. But most of the time will be spent on earth, and that will be called heaven as well. In Hebrews 11, verses 9 and 10, it says, "By faith Abraham sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God." So Paul draws our attention to the fact that to inherit the land of Israel was not the goal of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were looking forward to the time when the New Jerusalem comes down from heaven and lands on this earth, and that will be the fulfillment that God had promised to them. But in the meantime, millions of other people have been able to have the same hope and to look forward to the time when this earth will be heaven. It's very clear it's not that right now, but it is to be in the future. In Prophets and Kings, page 274, it says, "With the eye of faith, man may behold the threshold of heaven, flushed with God's living glory." Notice how it happens. It's by faith that we can see it. God hasn't given us pictures. There's no way we can understand it without faith presenting it to us. Through his ministering servants, the Lord Jesus is calling upon men to strive with sanctified ambition to secure the immortal inheritance. Is it worth striving for? Well, it's better than we can possibly imagine, but we have been given some indications of what it's going to be like. He urges them to lay up treasure beside the throne of God. There's two ways we can lay up treasure for that time when we get to enjoy heaven. One is through our offerings, through our tithe and offerings, and the other is through the people that we influence to decide to go to heaven. And then we are really preparing to live in heaven. In Revelation 21, we read again verses 2 and 3. "And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven." Now, a prophet, of course, sees it in advance to when it happens, but it gives a reality to this wonderful city that is going to be transferred from where it is now down to this earth. And that's what will make this earth heaven, as well as the fact that it will be created new. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. In the beginning we were made in the image of God, so that when the sin problem was completely over, that he would transfer his place of dwelling down to this earth. And they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. Now, God may interest us in the beginning in golden streets and mansions and so on, but as the Christian advances in their Christian life, the thing that becomes the most important is that he himself, God himself, shall be with them. We have no concept of what it's like to live where God is. There's nothing on earth that can possibly thrill people or affect them more than this possibility. People are chasing after many things, and they're actually going to give up heaven for some of them, but they don't know what they're giving up. To have the privilege of living where God is able to visit with us, to talk to us, and to not have to hide his glory and what he has to do now. And so that should become the focus of why we want to get to heaven. To be able to make him happy because he's longing to be with us and to be in his presence. Revelation 22, 1-3 tells us a little bit about what heaven's going to be like. And he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. You know, generally speaking, I really enjoy living here in the South. I don't like the cold of the North, but there's one thing I really miss. The rivers and the streams are not very pretty. They're muddy, especially when it rains. In Massachusetts, where I grew up as a boy, the streams were always clear, perfectly clear. They're not as clear as the one we'll see in heaven, but I miss that. And so that's one of the things that we're going to experience is the beauty of water that's pure and clean. In the midst of the street of it, and on either side of the river, was there the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month. So God has a special tree. It's the same one that Adam and Eve ate from before the fall. And God has been taken care of. In fact, the whole Garden of Eden was taken up to heaven before the flood. It was not going to allow the flood to destroy this beautiful garden that had been made that had the tree of life in it. And so that will get given back to the human race. And it, for those that might get bored eating the same thing all the time, it yields a different fruit every month. And you get to enjoy it. Now, some people, we knew a brother by the name of Brother Callahan, and he liked bananas so well that he thought the tree of life would have 12 varieties of bananas. But I don't think that's the way it's going to be. He's going to give us more variety than that. Also it says, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. And, at first I wondered, what kind of healing do we need? Well, the most obvious is we're too short. Yeah. And we have to grow to be 14 feet tall, or whatever it was. They don't know for sure. It could have been 18 feet tall. But we have to grow. We have to be healed. And the children, of course, have to grow as well and become as that height as well. So there's healing that has to happen even after we get there. But no sickness to be healed from. And there shall be no more curse. This summer, we're not getting the rain that we need to get for gardeners. I hope it changes, but some summers it doesn't. And so it's part of the curse. All the curse will be removed. But the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants shall serve him. That's another one of the tremendous blessings of heaven. Nobody that is saying they're serving God, but they don't really serve him. And no one that has no interest in serving him will be there. And so, can you imagine living in the midst of people like that? I was a little bit of taste of it, because you usually get better treatment than what you often get outside. But there are things that shouldn't happen there as well. And people get treated in a way they shouldn't be treated. But can you imagine sitting or living in a place where nobody ever mistreats anybody, and they always exercise love, and it's just going to be amazing to experience that. And verses 4 and 5 back in chapter 21, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. This morning I went to, the reason I was late is I went to be with the Madison, Reggie Madison and his group that meets early Sabbath morning. And I listened to some of the trials that these men had. One man's wife has cancer, and so she's having to go through treatment. And the other man that was there, his father-in-law passed away just recently. And the brother of his wife just got put in jail. We live a little bit sheltered from some of that. But when you talk to people of the world, you find out there's an awful lot of bad things going on. But many things that produce tears in this life. But when we get to heaven, there will be no more tears, and there shall be no more death. Now, if you look closely, there may be tears during the 1,000 years that were up past Orion. Why? Because you're going to learn about how people lived that were lost, and some of them will be close to you here, and it will be probably very sad. But you will see that God was just and fair. But when we get back down here, all that will be wiped away. No more tears, no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain. For the former things are passed away. And we don't all suffer a lot of pain. And if we do suffer some, it's usually temporary. But there are some people that suffer tremendous pain. I remember one man that was at Wildwood when we came there. He was a mechanic. That was not his original work, but he'd had a terrible auto accident, and as a result of that, he had severe back pain constantly. And I'd see him sometimes, he'd be pushing on his head like this, trying to relieve the pain, because it just was constant. And I thought to myself, what a situation to have to endure. But whether it's pain that's temporary or something that's long-term, God is going to take it all away in the future life. And he that sat upon the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. Now we may enjoy nature now because there are things that still have some of the beauty that God created, but we can hardly imagine what nature is going to be like when he makes it all new. And he said unto me, in other words, make sure everybody knows about this. And he said unto me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. It's no lie. It's going to be. People can call it whatever they want, but it is going to happen, and it's not too far off. Here's a little account also from Mount of Blessing, page 17. The earth, promised to the meek, will not be like this, darkened with the shadow of death and the curse. There is no disappointment, no sorrow, no sin, no one who shall say, I am sick. There are no burial trains, no mourning, no death, no partings, no broken hearts, but Jesus is there. Peace is there. Isn't that enough to motivate us, if there was nothing else? To motivate us to really look forward to that wonderful time. That's the way God wanted it to be for the human race. It's only our fault that it hasn't been that way. And so he is going to restore the kind of life that he intended for the whole human race. We could spend time on each of those, but I'm sure you've experienced several of those. Maybe some have experienced all of them, but they will all be removed, and not just for a vacation, but for eternity. They are going to be removed. Isaiah spoke about heaven in Isaiah 32:18. Said, my people shall dwell in a peaceable habitation. I read that, I thought about the Ukrainians. That promise should really mean a lot to them right now. My people shall dwell in a peaceable habitation and in sure dwellings. You know, here some people don't know whether the owner of the building is going to up their rent and whether they can afford it or not, or whether they're going to be thrown out for some reason, or whether they can't pay the mortgage and they're going to lose the house. But we're told that in heaven we don't have any of those worries. In sure dwellings and in quiet resting places. You know, I can appreciate that, living near 3 railroad tracks. What a blessing it is to be in the quiet. And I like to go to these other institutions where it's all quiet and you don't hear any of those things. Also in Isaiah 60 verse 18, violence shall no more be heard in thy land. That should be really precious to us now, it seems like it's getting to where there's a shooting almost every day somewhere. Can you imagine shooting your doctor? That one was incredible to me, that somebody would shoot the doctor. Violence shall no more be heard in thy land, wasting nor destruction within thy borders. We have a lot of wasting through forest fires, through just plain dryness, not enough water, but all that's going to be wiped out. But thou shalt call thy walls salvation, and thy gates praise. That's the best part of all of it. We're going to be praising God for the salvation which He has worked out through us and for us. Another one in Isaiah chapter 65, 21 and 22. They shall build houses and inhabit them. Now we are thankful we've been able to live over 30 years in one house, but that hasn't always been our experience. In the first 14 years that we were involved in self-supporting work, we moved 14 times. Sometimes it was more than once a year, and sometimes it was a little longer. But I counted it up, 14 times I had to move. That is a pain in the neck to have to move. And so I really look forward to this, that we will build houses so we can have a house exactly like we want it to be, and we will live in that throughout eternity. There are homes on earth that have taken dozens of years, maybe even more than dozens of years to build. And so I would guess that we will be making improvements on the house, and there's no limit to what we can decide to do. And they shall plant vineyards and eat the fruit of them. Sometimes now you plant and you don't get a harvest. I had to plant 3 different blueberry patches before I got anything out of them. The first one, it was apparently the soil was not the kind of pH that it ought to be, and I didn't think about that. I just put my plants in, and they didn't amount to anything. The second patch was taken over by Bermuda grass and choked out. And so finally, the third one, I've had lots of blueberries. In fact, we got blueberries ahead for several years now. But to be able to do the work and to enjoy what you've done, this year I was determined to get a fig tree. I got 6 cuttings, and out of the 6 of them, only one of them looks like it's going to do anything. It's got some green leaves coming out of it, and the others look dead. But we won't have that problem in heaven. We're gonna, whatever we plant will grow. We'll get to enjoy it. They shall not build and another inhabit. When we had to move so much, I would prepare a garden spot and maybe do some things around the home to make it better, and then we had to leave it to somebody else. I didn't actually mind that too bad if they appreciated it, but sometimes they didn't. And so the strawberry patch that I planted, they just let it grow up to weeds. They didn't care about it at all. Well, that's not very enjoyable. But in the new earth, we will build, and another will not inhabit it. We will plant, and another one won't eat of it unless we give it to them, but they probably won't need it. Mine elect shall long enjoy the work of their hands. Here's another one, Isaiah 35, verse 1. The wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them. In other words, it's going to be lush growth, even in the wilderness. The wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose. I don't know if you've ever seen a video of what happens in the desert when it rains. It does occasionally rain. And it's amazing how many plants just instantly spring up. Beautiful things, sometimes flowers and so on. So what they lack is water. And God is going to see to it that there's water everywhere and that it grows beautiful in all parts of the earth. Isaiah 55:13, instead of the thorn shall come up the fir tree, and instead of the briar shall come up the myrtle tree. Sometimes when you try to work your yard or garden, you run into thorns. That was one of the things that God said would happen due to sin, but that's going to be removed. And we won't struggle with those things. They're a pain to deal with because you're very easily going to get hurt trying to get rid of them. We don't probably have the same love for the myrtle tree, but whatever your favorite tree is, that's what you can put in there that God is going to give you instead of what is there because of sin. In Isaiah 11:6, the wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid. Here we have peace in nature. Some animals we can't really enjoy, only like in a zoo, but we can't really enjoy them. But here we find that we will enjoy all the animals and they will not hurt each other at all. And a little child shall lead them. So even while our children are little, which they won't stay little, but they will have the pleasure of leading these animals that were dangerous before. Here's another description, Faith I Live By, page 368. In the Bible, the inheritance of the saved is called a country. There are ever-flowing streams, clear as crystal, and beside them, waving trees cast their shadows upon the paths prepared for the ransomed of the Lord. Now, I don't know whether that river that comes out of the throne of God keeps breaking up in small streams all over the earth, or whether there are other streams, but this makes it clear that all over the earth we're going to have these ever-flowing streams. It will never dry up for any period of time, always be flowing, and it's clear as crystal, just like the one the Bible mentioned. And then, of course, wherever there are streams, there are beautiful trees that are such a joy to look at and to enjoy. But it won't be like here in the South. You know, the woods becomes like a jungle, and it's very hard to go through the woods if you don't have a machete or something else to cut your way through. But up and again in Massachusetts, it wasn't like that. You could walk anywhere in the woods, and so that's a little picture of what it's going to be like, but far better than that. There, the wide spreading plains swell into hills of beauty. So it's not going to just all be flat. There's going to be hills, and the mountains of God rear their lofty summits. So there's actually going to be mountains in the new earth. It's going to not be rocky, like some of the ones we have now, but the beautiful mountains on those peaceful plains beside those living streams. God's people, so long pilgrims and wanderers, shall find a home. Abraham told us, or at least Paul told us, what Abraham thought. And he didn't look upon this world as his home. He looked upon that country that God had promised to him. That was to be his home, that city and that country. And so he didn't mind living in tents because he wasn't going to live forever here on this earth. And we may live in some circumstances that are not ideal and that we wish were different, but we don't need to worry about that because we're just passing through. This is not our home. God has prepared the home for us in the future. Now here's what impressed me when I read it, and I needed to give a sermon on it. Faith I Live By, page 365. We want to get in the habit of talking of heaven, beautiful heaven. You don't have to tell me whether you're in the habit of doing that, but I would say even if you mention it now and then, you probably don't think about it often enough. So, God is calling us, especially as we near the end, because there's a lot of things that are going to happen. Things are not going to get better. More people are going to get shot. More wars are going to start. All kinds of things are going to take place. And so what he wants us to do is to keep our focus about the country where we're going. We want to get in the habit of talking of heaven, beautiful heaven. Talk of that life which will continue as long as God shall live. And then you will forget your little trials and difficulties. So one of the reasons why we need to be thinking about heaven is so we don't get focused on what's happening on earth. Yes, there's a lot of bad things, but I like to think of it this way. If you were behind enemy lines, would you expect to have an easy life? No. You know that at any moment, an enemy can find you. Even the ones that are not in the army are not going to be happy to have you around because you're behind enemy lines. So that's where we are right now. We're behind enemy lines, and the enemy finds ways to make trouble and difficulty for us in all kinds of ways. But if we're thinking about heaven as often as we should, they won't bother us. We'll be able to just go right on and not let that get us down. I'm sure you know this one from 1 Corinthians 2, verse 9. But as it is written, eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. Now that actually has a double application. Eye has not seen the spiritual blessings that God could give to us if we seek after them. But it also means that beautiful country and that beautiful city that we are going to get to live in. That there's nobody's imagination that can picture, based on something we've seen on earth, Nobody can picture what it's going to be like. It'll be so much better than that. Faith I Live By 364. If we could have but one view of the celestial city, we would never wish to dwell on earth again. Apparently John had that view. Ellen White had that view. And so she tells us the truth. If God were to give us that view, we wouldn't even want to live here anymore. But we have to until the right time. Let your imagination picture the home of the saved. And remember that it will be more glorious than your brightest imagination can portray. In the varied gifts of God and nature we see but the faintest gleaming of His glory. Human language is inadequate to describe the reward of the righteous. So, even if we saw it, we would not be able to tell anybody how wonderful it was. It will be known only to those who behold it. No finite mind can comprehend the glory of the paradise of God. So, even if we saw it, we couldn't comprehend what we were seeing adequately. That's how wonderful it is, what He's prepared for us. And maybe you've heard of one vision that Ellen White had. I didn't put it in here. But in vision, she was in heaven, and she saw some of the pioneers, and they were, she wanted to talk to them. And so I forget just exactly how it happened, but I think they asked her about the trials that had gone on after they died. And as she thought about how beautiful heaven was and about the trials that, had taken place, there was nothing she could say. It wasn't worth even bringing up. And so this is how it will look in the future, and He wants to try to help us to look at it now, that way. Well, in light of heaven, what is this going to matter? In light of what God is going to do for us if we're faithful to Him, what does it matter what's going on right now? Maybe the worst possible things are happening to me, but it doesn't matter because we have an eternity of the blessings that God has outlined for us. You're familiar with John 14, 2 and 3. In my Father's house are many mansions. Now, I've heard some interesting things about this one. Some Bibles, they put rooms in there. And I don't know whether it's true, but I heard the one lady said, no, I like the King James better. King James gives me a mansion. But neither one is correct. And I'll show you why in a minute. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. Think of it personally. Right now, He's already working on a place for you to live. When you get to heaven, He knows who will get there. If you're not going to make it, He won't make one for you, but we trust that everybody here is going to make it. Amen. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again. What good would the place do if He doesn't come back to get us? But He promised both. I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. But what about this mansion idea? Is God really going to give us a mansion? In a letter, 84, 1907, it says the word here translated mansion means permanent abodes. So it doesn't mean a mansion, doesn't mean a room. It means that God is going to make a permanent place for you to live. How big or how little isn't going to matter to us. You know, whether it's a mansion or something smaller, doesn't matter. What matters is we have it throughout eternity. It's forever, this place that He's made for us. The word here translated mansion means permanent abodes, habitations that are not removed like tents. Now, most of us live in what's better than a tent, and yet for some it is a temporary thing. And so He wants us to dwell upon the permanent part, but which permanently endure for the family of the redeemed. Well, I'm sure you had no problem wanting to be there as we went through this, but what we need to correct based on what we studied is that we think about it more often, and we talk to other people about it more often, so that when the trials come and the difficulties come and the sorrow and all that, that it doesn't affect us so much. Instead, we'll be thinking. Now, an atheist may think that's a crutch. You know, who cares what they think? God has intended for us to think about it because it's real. It's not just a crutch to somehow get us through and then it doesn't materialize. That's not the purpose of it. It is a reality, more real than what we're experiencing now. And so He wants us to think about it, talk about it with others and with each other, and we will have more and more interest to be there, as well as facing life in a much easier manner.